on the economy precisely, Nigeria's debt servicing and growing dependence on loans. And before we go into that, we read earlier during our news point that inflation is easing to about 15.43% amid food price surge. We'll also be looking at that together with my guest on the program this morning. We have in the studio Dr. Oluwashola Ganiu, Chartered Accountant and Financial Advisor, right here with us in the studio this morning to look at Nigeria's debt servicing and growing dependence on loans. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, before we go into our main topic for today, let's look at what we read earlier in the Punch of today, saying that inflation is easing to about 15.43% amid food price surge. What do you make of it? Inflation is coming down, but yet people are paying more for food prices. And the mathematics is not adding up for an average Nigerian who is out there on the street saying that some of the reforms of government is not making impact.
Okay, that's a good question. And when you look at it, there are a lot of parameters that there's a lot of parameters that determines the inflation level of a country, right? The rising, we could do food, what that of food is what we call CPI, cost plus cost price index, right? And so a lot of parameters drive inflations of a country, right? When we talk about the inflow of currency, right, when we look at the monetary policy of the government, one of the things that drive inflation is that if too much money is running after few goods in the country, that's what we call cost push inflation. And when you look at it, in the midst of it, dollar is already stable with our naira, right? And so there are no too much pressure on naira. And so because of this, there's a bit of stability at the global space. Right, so it is not as it was at the beginning of the year or at the late of last year, where a lot of people are stocking their money in dollars, right? And so because of that, a whole lot of people are pushing more on dollar, and naira is dropping, right? And the inflation is skyrocketing. So by now, dollar is stable. Okay. So the level of inflation is dropping, right? Though there is a the food cost is still rising due to insecurity. Okay.
Farmers are not able to go to farm.
Right. You will agree with me, for you to move goods from Benue to Lagos, you have a lot of roadblock on the road, you have a lot of issues on the road, and so a lot of these business people are scared of going. And so going there, they need some level of escort, which increase
their cost.
Transportation costs. It also increase the business cost, the cost of sales. And so because of that, that still drive the rising price of food, right? For you to move foods, tomatoes from the north and from Maiduguri here and there, you need a lot of security measures on ground. And only a few people can ply the road. So the few people that are plying the road, it also increased their cost of sales. And do not forget also that one of the driving force of food, of the cost of food, is the fuel, right? As we speak, fuel is around 1.2 over 1,200 naira per liter. Per liters, right? And so once the cost of fuel is increasing, it snowballs into the cost of food, and they pass it to the final consumer, which will make them to pay more for that commodity, because these are the driving force and has nothing to do with inflation, because inflation has to do with monetary policy of the CBN, and a lot of parameters drive the inflation of the country, not specifically our food production.
Okay, so back to the business of the day, which is Nigeria's debt servicing and growing dependence on loans. As at early this year, Nigeria's total public debt was about 159.35 trillion as at early 2026. And the core crisis is not just the debt size, but a low revenue base that forces government to spend a massive share of its income on low repayment and servicing, starving infrastructure and public investment on final funds. We have seen people appraise some of the reforms, economic reforms of the current administration under President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, saying that some of these reforms are very good and is putting the economy of the country on the right path. But the rate at which we are borrowing is still worrisome, and people are not convinced if indeed the economy is on the right path. Why would government will continue to borrow every now and then?
So that's a good question, right? And a brilliant one indeed. But I will take it from the basis, from the known to unknown. So debt itself is not bad, all right? Debt is one of the things that makes a country or an organization to move forward. So for a typical balance sheet of an organization, there's what we call debt and equity, right? Equity means that the money, the owner's money, they bring into the business to start the business. And they discover that the money they are bringing is not enough. They need to borrow money. That is what we call debt. So the debt, when we talk about capital structure in an organization, it's debt plus equity. And when you look at the balance sheet state of any organization, we have asset, we have liability, we have equity, right? And so there's no organization that wants to transact business at a large scale that will not borrow. Look at Dangote Refinery. It holds over 20 billion US dollars to be able to fund that refinery. So if it doesn't get a loan, it might not be able to do it. But where we are still coming from is that the excess of borrowing, misappropriation of funds, misappropriation of borrowing, and mismatch. And also, I want us to know what we call about debt stock. So when we talk about debt stock, it's also like an inventory of an organization. An inventory of an organization talks about the product they have to sell, right? It could be raw material, finished goods, or work in progress they can sell or they can use to produce other goods. And so when we now talk about debt stock of a country, it's talking about the combination of debts they have. They have the public debt and the external debt, the domestic debt. Okay, as for Nigeria, its debt stock is around 159.32 trillion, and which is approximately $114 billion, all right, billion US dollars. And so when you look at our domestic debt is around 87 trillion, right? And while we look at our external debt is around 71.9 trillion. That is our debt bucket.
Okay, both
right.
Internal and external.
Both internal and external. That is our debt bucket. So the question we now look at it in real sense is that when you now look at servicing the debt, you know, we have, this is our debt we are owing. So servicing debt just simply means that we are repaying both the principal and the interest. That is what we call we are servicing debt. And so in all these things, there's what we also call debt strategy. That strategy is also to ensure that we don't use long-term debt to fund short-term loan, right? In other words, we don't borrow that a loan that will take us for 10 years to pay, and we now take the loan and to pay salary. So that is mismanagement. Okay. So if we are getting a long-term debt, we must invest it into an investment or infrastructure that will be able to stand the test of time for the repayment of that loan. So that helps us to be able to look at it vividly. And when you look at it, for us to have a good debt strategy, and we also need to have fiscal discipline. Fiscal discipline in the sense that when we borrow a loan, we must ensure that this is what is used for. Take, for instance, during the closing tenure of the late President Mohamed Buhari, there was a loan from the World Bank, 800 million US dollars, to be able to cushion the effect of fuel subsidy, right? And also to be able to serve as a palliative. And in the long run, there was a time that the World Bank came back and says that they discovered that even 99% of the loan was not used for what it was meant for. That is what we call mismatch. But now let us tickle it down to where we are going. IMF, that is International Monetary Fund, and OECD, that is Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, they have a benchmark for any organization, for any country in the world. A benchmark shows that like a threshold. Once you exceed this threshold, then it will be a trigger.
Have we not exceeded it?
So that is where I'm coming. Once you exceed this threshold, there will be a trigger. And in real sense, economically, Nigeria has not exceeded its threshold. So because in the debt palace, there's what we call government debt to GDP. So what do we call GDP? GDP is just gross domestic product. So GDP is just like the total product value of the product you produced in a year, right? And the total our value of services you produce, you rendered in a year, putting them together, that is what we call GDP, that forms what Nigeria gets in a year.
So
right?
our debt to our GDP ratio is still making sense.
So it's making sense. This is the threshold that OECD benchmark gives. It says that a country should be within 60% to 90%. If the government debt to GDP ratio, to GDP percentage is between 60% to 90%, you are good to go. So as we speak, Nigeria is 46%. Okay. That is why you could see IMF still come to us and say, oh, we can still borrow you. You still have a lot of debt appetite, right? So this, let me put it in a way for a layman to understand it. In other words, that if Nigeria is producing a 100,000, let's say 100,000 goods and services in a year, which means that our production will sell clothes, will render services in a year, it's worth 100,000, correct? So what the law says that out of that 100,000, the maximum, you know, I said that debt plus equity, the maximum you could borrow is 90,000 for you to be able to make that 100,000. That if anything you are borrowing, maybe said, I want to produce this shirt, this suit, right? And I need 100,000 to produce this suit, right? And the law says that, benchmark says that I can only borrow 90,000. If I borrow more than 90,000, then there's a risk there. So in a real sense, in all our production and rendering of services, what Nigeria has actually borrowed is 46%. In other words, out of the 100,000, we have only loaned out 46,000. So 54,000 is actually coming from us, right? So the IMF, the OECD said our benchmark, our threshold is still fine, right? Even you look at America. America threshold is over 112%, which means that it's at a risk. Japan is 250%. Wow. So the question is now saying that, so the threshold is saying that if we are below 60%, we are good. Between
we are
60,
still at 46.
Yes, we are 46. Between 60% and 90%, we should look at what you closely because you're about crossing the line. But once you go beyond 90%, then that's a risk. So another one now comes and says that we talk about budget deficit to GDP. So budget deficit to GDP, the OECD threshold says that it should not exceed 3%. In other words, if I am producing 100,000, you know, this is maybe my total, my GDP is like my salary. Making my salary in a year, in a year is 1 million, correct? And so the OECD threshold said that the maximum I can borrow should not exceed 3% of my total income. So if we say 3% of my total income, that could be around, maybe we talk about 30,000. So the maximum I can borrow is 3%. So now Nigeria has if we look at our revenue, what we have borrowed is more than our revenue. We are at a threshold of 3.8%. In other words, this is one of the things that IMF is crying about, that yes, our debt appetite is good, but we have crossed the threshold of our revenue. We are borrowing more than, it's just like I'm earning I'm borrowing more than what
are you implying that some of the borrowings, we are also using it to service our debt?
So this is...
Because this government has painted the picture that, okay, because of fuel subsidy removal, we seem to be generating more income, and we have also tried to diversify the economy. The mineral resources is there, and we're also generating money, saving for the future. But then, some of these monies are being channeled towards the servicing of these debts. And when you look at our annual budget, we had seen ministers come before members of the National Assembly complaining and lamenting that, fine, they had figures for their ministries inside the paper, but those funds were not released to them to fund their ministries.
So most of the funds are released, but the question is that we have a lot of misappropriation, right? Because this is also where we have issues, because we have a debt servicing to our revenue. The money we are using to service our debt is more than what we earn as revenue. And this is where IMF and OECD is crying foul and said that, hey, Nigeria, stop here. Because they discovered that the threshold they gave to that place that maximum, if I'm earning 100 million, right? Maximum amount that I should use to, if I'm earning a 1 million, the maximum, 100,000, the maximum amount I should use for servicing my debt should not be more than 15,000. Maximum is 20,000. Yeah, maximum is 20,000. So that I can have 80,000 to do a whole lot of things. So as we speak in Nigeria, out of 100,000, we are using around 46,000 to service debt. And so what we have left is not enough. And because of what we have left is not enough, we had to borrow more. And so the question now says that Nigeria does not have debt issue. What we have is revenue issue. Right?
Because
so,
most of the revenues that we are generating is what we are using to service those debts.
Even what they now says that the revenue we are generating, it's not even enough. Our revenue generation, it has a slow pace to the volume of debt we are consuming, right? And which is actually drowning us, right? Now take, for instance, out of 100 million that we should generate as revenue, correct? It's only 7 to 8% that we are generating. So let's assume that maximum percent is 10%. So rather for us to get the 100 million at hand, what we could get is 10 million.
So imagine what happened between Israel, US, and Iran, where the price of crude had to rise. So economically for Nigeria, it was not a positive because of the debt that we had to service.
Yeah, because the issue is now that what brings us into where we are is because our currency was devalued. So now imagine from 460 to 1,500, 1,300, most of our foreign debt is 71.9 trillion. So the debt, let's assume that our debt is 700 million, right? And because our currency was devalued, 7 times 3, that is around 21 trillion. So we need to pay more because of our currency that was devalued. Okay. So which put us in a disadvantaged position. That was why the former CBN governor, a coordinating minister of the economy, that at this point in time, we should stop borrowing. So what we should also would have used is to concentrate on non-oil sector for us to generate more funds. And also, this should also have been a plus to us. Because when you look at most countries that are doing well, right, their revenue was climbing. We already have Dangote refinery. We should concentrate on it more and also encourage other refineries. Look at, we don't know what NNPC is doing. Over the years, NNPC has not turned in up to $1 billion US dollars. Right, as NNPC, revenue. And we call it a national asset. And look at Saudi Aramco, right? Within the space of 3 months or 4 months, they've generated over $5 billion, right, as revenue. And since NNPC have been established, and we now move it to NSP, and when you look at countries around the world, it's not a must for you to own a national asset as well. US never own. And every year, US is producing 10 million barrels per day, right? And so where are we now? We can encourage other captains of industry that have the financial muscle. That's why we talk about PPP, public-private partnership. So once we move into that space, it's not a must for the government can release the asset to the public. If you have the capacity, the financial muscle, come in. And the government will earn more because the government will collect tax from them. It is going to earn more revenue from them. It's also going to earn part of the share because it's also going to act as a regulator. And so once the government is acting as a regulator.
Just like we have like 20% in the Dangote refinery.
So once the government, you are good to go. All you just need to monitor it, and money is snowballing into your pocket. Remember, before now, we also have NITEL that was not properly managed. So, and the government now released its hand and allow the captains of industry to come into that space. And we have a lot of people in the telecommunication sector. Now the government is telecommunication sector is one of the sectors that is creating more revenue for the government.
Okay. All right. So as it is today now, we still have infrastructural gaps. The education health sector are still lagging behind. And people are questioning government as to the essence of some of these borrowings if we are still lagging behind in terms of infrastructure, roads, and some other things that I just highlighted now. So what is the justification for these borrowings? Are we borrowing to accelerate growth, or we are just borrowing to survive as a nation?
So this is a very brilliant question coming at this time. And there's a saying that said, if the purpose of a thing is not known, abuse is inevitable, right? If we don't channel the essence of borrowing to what is meant for, naturally, when you see countries that develop massively in the world, you borrow for infrastructure. Okay. You borrow to develop organization. You borrow to develop industry, because the infrastructure should be able to pay back your loan, right? It does not make any economic sense for you to borrow for recurrent expenditure. You borrow to pay salary, you borrow to buy vehicles, that does not fund your bills, right? But once you borrow, it's just like you as a person, you borrow to buy a brand new car for yourself. It's not an asset, it's a liability, because you fuel it, you take care of it to service it. But if you buy it to use it for Uber, you use it for a kind of high-level transportation,
that's an asset.
It's going to pay back the debt. And over time, it becomes useful to you. And as you are using it, you also technically engage your youth, because they will be technically engaged, because once you develop an industry, you're going to increase level of employment. And so once you increase level of employment, our GDP will rise. Do not forget, GDP is the total production you produce in a year, all the services you render. So once a lot of people are engaged, there are more to produce, there are more services to render, and the GDP will increase. And when the GDP is increasing, the government will be earning more.
Okay, so now we still have the problem of power. Aside from other infrastructure that I listed earlier, we are not able to generate 10,000 megawatts as a country with this kind of huge population. So if we had borrowed to increase our power, that would have been more productive for you.
This is a question coming at this time. Do you know Nigeria has a very good structure, an ecosystem? You see, fixing power would have also been very good for us, because no country succeed without power. Look at what China is doing. Look at what US is doing, right? So look at it now. Even we can also generate power without also sweating. We have a lot of heat wasting in the north. That's what we call thermodynamic. You can use heat. It could generate, this is what was converted to solar. Once they absorb more heat, they produce light in the night, right? And now we focus more on Kanji Dam, which is hydro, to get on. Why can't we diversify, look inward, and see what we can do better, so that we can maximize the resources we have in a way that will not only benefit the citizen, it's going to benefit the country at large.
Okay, so talking about our budgeting system now, we have had government saying that we have budget deficit because the country is not generating so much resources. So how do we begin to fill in the gap in such a way that our budgeting system will start making sense to us? As it is now, we are running a 2 or 3 budget cycle by this current administration.
Okay. When you look at the 2026 budget outlook, it will be of interest for you to know that our total expenditure in it is around 62 trillion in the budget 2026 budget outlook. And it will also be of interest for you to know that the budget deficit is between 17 to 29 trillion. So the question is that, and we are still exceeding the threshold of 3%, right? So we have a lot of economics up there. Can we please, can we structure, when you look at our budget, what is the quantum that is allocated to infrastructure? You will not see a country that's underplay infrastructure and actually grow. So because one of the things that makes a country to grow, an economy to grow, is infrastructure. The more and to make the environment conducive for business to be able to thrive, right? So at this point in time, we look at into our budget cycle, we put the round peg in the round hole, and also we ensure that the right thing is done. So and we talk about budget padding, we talk about, okay, the voting of the budget. Can we just sit down and look at the outlook and see that, will this budget at this time benefit the country? We look at our revenue. Are we still going to use over 46% of that revenue to service our debts? Do we still need to borrow more? And if there's a need for us to borrow, there's something in the public space that says value of money audit. What we are borrowing for, do we use it for it? And is there things put in place? Is there strategy put in place to be able to monitor, to ensure that this money is used for what it's meant for? Because Nigeria cannot be a developing country forever. Because I think in the mid-80s, right, Nigeria, China, India, we are both developing countries together.
But now we are far behind those countries.
Because they took their life in their hands and said that China, as we speak now, India is also, there's a research that says in the next 10 years, India economy will outrun China. In other words, for you to get an India visa, it's like a camel passing through the needle of the eye.
Wow.
And when you look at their health facilities, it's a top notch. So these are things we can look inward and restructure our amenities, our budget, and also ensure that we divert what are the right necessary fund for right infrastructures.
All right, we still have in the studio Dr. Oluwasola Ganiyu, Chartered Accountant and Financial Advisor, talking about Nigeria's debt servicing and growing dependence on loans. He's still here with us. He's not going anywhere yet. We'll take a very quick break now. When we come back, our final conversation on the issues on the front burner this morning.